How USA created refugees and why banning them is ethically wrong. On Saturday, Reuters obtained a report conducted by UN experts advising the UN Security Council that the USA-backed, Saudi-led coalition's attacks in Yemen may amount to war crimes. The report investigated 10 coalition airstrikes between March and October that killed over 292 civilians, including some 100 women and children. Saudi Arabia is leading a military coalition made up of Bahrain, Kuwait, Qatar, the UAE, Egypt, Jordan, Morocco, and Sudan. Out of all of these countries wreaking havoc on Yemen, the poorest country in the Middle East, only Sudan makes Trump's ban list of refugees. Yemen, the victim of the onslaught, also makes the list. One of the Middle East's bloodiest conflicts is also one of its most overlooked. It's not Syria or Iraq. It's in a different place entirely. Yemen, the 20-month-old civil war there killed more than 10,000 people and triggered a massive humanitarian crisis, but press coverage has been minimal, overshadowed by the fight against ISIS in Syria and Iraq. In Yemen, one side has the Houthi rebels backed by Iran. On the other you have the former Yemeni government of Abdrabbuh Mansur al-Hadi backed by a coalition of 10 countries led by neighboring Saudi Arabia, who is ultimately also backed by the US. The civil war there erupted and when the Houthi, a Shiite group who receive money and weapons from Iran, took up arms to overthrow Yemen's government, which is Sunni and backed by Saudi Arabia. The Houthis complain that the government discriminated against them for years, mistreating them on a large scale, and that their fight is a fight to be treated fairly. Many in the region by contrast see it very differently. They think it's the latest front in a shadow war between Saudi Arabia and Iran for control over the entire region. In March of 2015, Saudi Arabia began bombing Houthi-held territory across Yemen, causing mass civilian casualties. They've destroyed targets ranging from marketplaces to hospitals, from schools and even to a funeral recently where 140 people were killed in a single strike. In August, the Saudis bombed the vital part of Al Hudaydah, severely damaging a main source of Yemen's food and humanitarian aid shipments, and increasing the chances of mass starvation in what is already an impoverished country. The indiscriminate bombing has prompted investigations by the UN for possible war crimes. While the Saudis are leading this bloody campaign, the blame also spreads to great power whose support is directly contributing to the carnage to the United States. In recent years, Saudi Arabia has bought more weapons from the USA than any other country in the world. Just since March of, the USA authorized $22 billion worth of weapons sales to Saudi Arabia. The most recent deal includes 20 Abrams tanks listed as battle damage replacements. The battle, of course, is Yemen. The weapons the USA sells also include cluster bombs banned by most of the international community and F-15 fighter planes, which is making up the vast bulk of what the Saudi Air Force is currently using as it bombs Yemen. So why is the USA so supportive of this bloody campaign? The most important reason is the Iran nuclear deal. In 2015, the Obama administration offered to drop its crippling economic sanctions on Iran in exchange for Iran limiting its nuclear program. Without those sanctions, Iran's political and economic power has significantly increased, making Saudi Arabia nervous that their enemy will gain new influence in the region. To countries from Iraq to Lebanon and Syria to Yemen. Now that Iran and influences in Saudi Arabia's backyard, the Saudis fear that Houthi rebels loyal to Iran will now be literally on the footsteps of their country. They want U.S. help beating them back. Okay, fine. But that was Obama. Donald J. Trump clearly has new and improved plans for foreign policy and immigration and for dealing with refugees across the board. Correct? Well, not really. Barely hours after his inauguration, the military conducted drone strikes in Yemen. This is in light of the fact that former drone operators wrote an open letter to Barack Obama claiming the drone program is the single most effective recruitment tool for groups like ISIS. Then, on top of these drone strikes, Trump ordered a raid involving Navy SEALs that reportedly killed at least one 8-year-old girl, as well. Refugees don't appear out of thin air. While Trump uses refugees from 7 Muslim-majority nations as a scapegoat for the inner turmoil facing the United States and other Western nations, his policies will only help exacerbate the refugee crisis, leaving parts of Europe and the wider Middle East to deal with the fallout. By all means, close your doors to Yemen, but only after you withdraw all your personnel, equipment, aircraft, and material and financial support for war crimes committed in one of the world's poorest countries. Until then, the least one can do is welcome with open arms those who are fleeing a horrific war conducted by an inexperienced, cowardly, violent coalition to avoid further radicalization of those civilians innocently caught up in geopolitically motivated wars. Banning them is not the solution. Stopping war is.